UFC London went down this weekend, which means it's time for me to play matchmaker for every single fighter on the main card. So just talking through who I think they should be booked against next. Let me know your thoughts down below if you guys agree, disagree with my takes. Would love to hear it. But we have to start off with the man in the main event with the career best performance. It is Sean Brady. And I do think we could go in a couple different directions here. I'm going to start off by talking about him taking on the winner of Belal against JDM, so potentially getting a title shot up next. I do think he has the resume for that at this point. He's 8-1 in the UFC. He's on a 3-fight win streak against Kelvin Gastelum, Gilbert Burns, Leon Edwards. And if you go out there, dominate the guy who just lost the belt, typically that is going to bank yourself a title shot. He also did it on short notice, which I think is even more impressive. I do think it's kind of just going to come down to the timeline of a guy like Shavkat Rakhmonov, because Belal JDM is taking place on May 10th, UFC 315. There's not really a ton of time where if Brady was going to be next for him to take like another number one contender fight, but Shavkat's dealing with a knee injury. We just don't know when he's going to return. I do think Shavkat's going to have that title shot sitting there waiting when he gets back and healthy, because he had already earned the title shot, agreed to take another kind of number one contender fight against Ian Gary, and I think it would be pretty bogus if the UFC kind of moved on from him. But there's also just no guarantee that he's going to be healthy to face the winner of that fight. So if Shavkat's healthy, I think the direction the UFC should go is against Joaquin Buckley. Buckley is on a 6-fight win streak since moving down to 170. He's coming off of back-to-back finishes against Colby Covington and Wonderboy, and I think that fight would be, worthy of a number one contender matchup. Sean Brady, Joaquin Buckley, the winner would take on the winner of Belal JDM. Whoever wins that against Shavkat Rakhmonov. So I think he could go into a title shot if Shavkat's going to be ready to fight. The champ's not going to have a quick turnaround. Then I do think Joaquin Buckley would be the next best option. And then for the loser of that main event, I think Leon Edwards' next fight should be against Ian Gary. This has definitely been a rough stretch for Leon. Back-to-back losses. I think the Belal fight was a little bit overblown. How dominant it was for Belal. It was a pretty competitive fight, like a 3-2 matchup. I think people acted like Leon just got completely neutralized. This one against Sean Brady was a tough look. That was just a dominant performance. He had no answers for Sean Brady's wrestling. And so I think this is a nice matchup here against Ian Gary. Leon was ranked number 1, probably going to be lower than that when the rankings adjust. So he has to fight down. Ian Gary ranked number 7, and even though he's coming off a loss, it was a good performance against Shavkat. I think he does still deserve kind of a step up in the rankings. This fight also has a backstory behind it. These guys are former training partners. Ian Gary got kicked out of Team Renegade, so there's some buildup there. You put this fight anywhere in Europe, I think it's going to get a lot of hype. Also, just stylistically, a favorable matchup for both these guys. They want to go out there. They want to strike. They're going to be able to do that in this matchup. So I think stylistically, it's fun. I think according to the rankings, it makes sense. Also has some build-up behind it. A lot of things go together to make this one a pretty solid fight. Then looking at the co-main event here, we have Carlos Ulberg. And I actually think that Ulberg should be waiting for a title shot. Now, I don't think this was some sort of amazing performance that stamped him as the next guy. But when you look at light heavyweight, it's just such a weak division. There's not a ton of, rising prospects. And I just think the weight class needs contenders. And so if I were the UFC, I would kind of want Carlos Ulberg to just sit on his spot. I think the Alex Pereira-Magomed Ankalaev rematch has to happen next. Pereira should be getting that immediate rematch. But then you look at the rest of the weight class, and number 1, 3, 4, and 5 are all coming off of losses. Yuri Prochazka is the only guy in the top 5 who's coming off a win. And obviously he had, the tough losses to Alex Pereira, where if Pereira gets that belt back, it's going to be tough to, sell that third fight against Yuri just with how competitive they were, especially the second one. And so if that rematch happens between Poatan and Ankalaev and Pereira wins, which certainly wouldn't be a shocking outcome, he's just going to have no one left to fight. And so I guess maybe he would move up to heavyweight. But if you're trying to preserve the health of the weight class, it would be nice to have Carlos Ulberg there. Also, just stylistically, Pereira against Ulberg would be a fun fight. Both strikers. You have the built-in storyline of Ulberg being a primary training partner of Israel Adesanya. I just think it would be a very fun matchup. And then if Magomed wins, maybe a make the Yuri fight, but Ulberg is still going to be relevant as a contender. He's on an 8-fight win streak. And so you could potentially book him against Yuri to get a true number 1 contender. I just don't think it makes a ton of sense, and I think you are going to be burning a potential title challenger. So right now, I would have him wait. if you did want to make like a super deserving number one contender and you're not worried about the depth of like top guys, then I think the Yuri fight does make some sense. And then for the loser of that co-main, Jan Blachowicz, this is kind of tough. I currently have him taking on Bogdan Guskov. Jan is on back-to-back losses. He is winless in his last 3. He's been inactive with his shoulder injuries. And like I said, this was a very close fight. It's not like he was dominated. It's not like he clearly lost. But just when you look at this weight class, a lot of the guys in like the top 15 are booked right now. So number 3, Jamal Hill, number 7, Khalil Roundtree, number 8, Nikita Krylov, number 10, Johnny Walker, number 11, Dominic Reyes, and then number 12, Azmat Mirzakhanov. They're all booked. Then you have number 5, Rakic, and number 9, Ozdemir, who are both coming off of losses. So it doesn't make sense for, obviously, the guys who are booked to fight Jan, and then it doesn't make sense for the guys ranked below him coming off of losses to get to fight up against Jan Blachowicz. And so then you kind of get to Bogdan Guskov as someone who's unranked and coming off a win. He's on a 3-fight win streak. All of them have been finishes. And so at this point, with the people who are booked, I think giving like a younger prospect in Guskov that potential, leapfrog into the top 5, that would be interesting. I think it's a potential option. Now, he also could wait, see how some of these other fights shake out, like a winner or loser of a Jamal Hill, Khalil Roundtree fight. Some of these other matchups, like he could sit around and wait, but the dude's also 42 years old. Didn't seem like he took a ton of damage in that fight. If he wants to stay active, really try to get back to the title, he's probably going to have to start taking some of these fights pretty quickly. So Guskov's an option, but I also do acknowledge that within a few months, this weight class could just look completely different in terms of the rankings. Now, looking at Kevin Holland's next opponent, I think he should take on Chidi Njokuani. This was a much-needed W for Kevin Holland. He had lost 4 of his last 5. I do think, and in line with my matchmaking here, I think he needs to stay at 170. I kind of get what he was saying after the fight, where he was like, if anyone wants to strike at 185, then he'll take those fights. And I do understand that, right? It's just the size disadvantage. In terms of his frame, like his height, his reach, he can definitely go out there and strike with guys at 185, but just the physicality, he's not going to be able to hold up. I do just think it makes sense for him to stay at 170. I think you're kind of getting into a weird territory where you're like, all right, we're going to matchmake him at middleweight, but we're only going to put him against guys that are going to strike. It's just, I feel like it's not really in the spirit of the sport. It's mixed martial arts for a reason. If you can't defend takedowns at 185, you should probably just cut down to 170 and continue taking fun fights there. And I think Chidi is a fun fight. He's on a 3-fight win streak, coming off a very, very impressive KO win against Alizu Zaleski on March 15th. So just a week before this, UFC London card. They have very similar frames, so they're both very big for 170. They're both 6'3". Njokuani has an 80-inch reach. Kevin Holland has an 81-inch reach. And Chidi wants to strike. He's not someone who's going to be shooting for Kevin Holland's legs. He has landed 0 takedowns in his 9 UFC fights. So I just think this is a fun matchup. I do think Chidi could be deserving of a shot at the rankings. I mean, you pick up a knockout win against Zaleski. That's legit. But I also think, you fight Kevin Holland, kind of increase your name value, get on a pay-per-view. And then if you win that fight, you're definitely looking at a guy in the top 15. And then for Kevin Holland, I just think it's a fun fight. He wants to go out there and strike. Chidi's someone that he can do that against. And then the loser of that Kevin Holland matchup, Gunnar Nelson. Now, this is kind of tough here for Gunnar Nelson because we don't really know if he actually wants to be active. He has 3 total fights in the last 5 years. So it's definitely possible that he kind of just disappears until they come back to London, in which case it's pretty tough to predict his next opponent. But assuming he wants to stay somewhat active, I think a matchup against Temba Garimbo would be interesting. This is grappler versus grappler. Garimbo has landed 15 takedowns in his 3 decision wins. He wants to go out there. He wants to wrestle. Gunnar Nelson obviously wants to use his jiu-jitsu. He has finished 14 of his 19 wins by submission. And so I think it's an interesting stylistic matchup. These are also sometimes the fights that turn into just striking battles where, both guys are kind of worried about the other guy's ground game. They just go out there and strike. But I do think, the proper way to match up Gunnar is booking against someone who could potentially want to, grapple with him so he can potentially show off that jiu-jitsu. Now, moving over to the one women's fight we had on the main card, we have Alexia Thainara. And I think she should be taking on Shauna Bannon, actually someone from this same card. She came in, had an impressive UFC debut, obviously submitted Molly McCann. She ends up retiring. I think the fact that they fought on the same card, in the same weight class, they're going to be on a very, very similar timetable. Now, maybe because Bannon kind of got dropped with that head kick, almost got put out, maybe she's going to be waiting a little bit longer to return. But I think in terms of like step up in competition for both of them, it makes sense. Bannon's 2-1 in the UFC. Thainara is going to be 1-0. Could potentially make sense. And then for Molly McCann, like I mentioned, she retired. Good on Molly McCann. Had some great, moments in some of those London fights. I always like when fighters kind of step away before they're truly forced to. And she did that. Like I said, had some fun performances there. Hope she enjoys retirement. Then we have Chris Duncan coming off a submission win against Jordan Vucenic. I liked his call out. He, called his shot against Terrence McKinney. I think it makes sense. Duncan's coming off of back-to-back submission wins. He is now 4-1 in the UFC, so racking up an impressive record. He is a finisher just like Terrence McKinney. He has finished 10 of his 13 wins. He has been finished in both of his losses. You look at Terrence McKinney, he's on a nice streak here. He's won 3 of his last 4. He has finished all 16 of his wins, and then in all of his losses, he has been finished. So Terrence McKinney, every single fight that he has been in has ended in a finish. I just think it's fun matchmaking here. Both guys are fairly well-rounded. They can go out there and strike. They can also grapple. I like the call-out, and I also like when guys get rewarded for like solid, realistic call-outs. If you want guys to say a name, then the UFC should try to put those fights together if it does make sense. This one makes sense. Would love to see it. Then for Jordan here, I think his next fight should be against Jamie Mullarkey. Kind of a rough start to the UFC run, 0-2 in his first 2 fights, but I think a lot of people were really high on him after his debut. This is kind of something that people fall into where when someone looks really good in a debut but they lose against higher competition, I think a lot of people, like including myself, then kind of overrate them moving forward. We saw that also in the, was it the Dos Santos Manel Cop fight where Santos like looked really good. And then since then, it just like hasn't been what you're expecting after you go toe-to-toe with someone at the top. And then also you look at Guram and he had a really rough performance. So had the close loss to Guram, looked good. I believe it was on short notice. And then he just came out here and suffered a submission loss to Chris Duncan. Now, admittedly, even though Guram didn't look great, like that's still a really tough 1-2 punch to kind of start off your UFC run. I still think he has the ability to be a really solid UFC fighter, and I think the Mullarkey fight makes sense. Mullarkey's 5-6 in the UFC. He does have a lot of experience, but he's kind of on a rough stretch here. He has lost 3 of his last 4. He's been knocked out in all 3 of those losses. So I think this is a fight that makes some sense, and I do think it would be pretty fan-friendly. And then I believe this is the final fight from the main card. We had Nathaniel Wood beating Morgan Charriere, and for Wood here, I think he deserves a crack at the top 15, so I have him taking on Calvin Kattar. Since moving up to 145, he is 5-1 in his 6 fights, and I also think he could pretty easily be undefeated if Naimov had a point taken from him, which I think he should have. That could have been a draw, in which case we're looking at like a 5-0-1 record since moving up. And it's not like he's just fighting complete randoms. Like he has some solid wins in there. Andre Fili, Charles Jourdain, Morgan Charriere. All the fights have been decisions, which might kind of be a knock against him, but they're not like boring decisions. Like they're just fun fights, and he's landed knockdowns in his last 3 wins. So even if he's not finishing fights, he's still finding ways to hurt his opponent, put on strong performances. Calvin Kattar's obviously been on like the opposite of Wood's run. He has 4 straight losses. He's currently ranked number 14. He's obviously going to need to fight outside the top 15, and I think Wood is certainly deserving of getting that shot. So Nathaniel Wood, Calvin Kattar, I think in terms of the rankings, getting a step up, step down for Kattar, I think it makes a lot of sense. And then also I just think on paper, it's a really, really fun matchup. And then the last guy here, we have Morgan Charriere. I think he should take on Melsik Bagdasaryan. This is a really fun matchup, striker versus striker. Both guys are coming off of losses. For Charriere against Nathaniel Wood. For Melsik Bagdasaryan, it was against John Silva. So, really no shame in either of those losses. Charriere is 2-2 in the UFC. Melsik is 3-2. Just a really fun stand-up fight. I think it lines up, with these guys' current UFC experience. And then I think stylistically, it's a really nice matchup. So that is going to wrap it up for matchmaking every single main card fighter. Let me know your thoughts. Do you agree with these matchups? Do you have some different opinions? I would love to hear it. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.